Hey folks, Cool18 here, and welcome to the PAX East report on Europa Universalis 4 Wealth of Nations. So, while I was attending the GameCon, I had the chance to sit down for an hour and talk with the lead developer for Wealth of Nations and fiddle around with one of the early builds and get some impressions and answer some questions. So we're going to go and do a quick run through of some of the features. If you have been watching all the multiplayer, the developers' multiplayer games and are active on the forum, there might not be a lot of new information here, but for other people, this should be a lot of good info. So this is standard EU4. I don't have access to the Wealth of Nations build, but we're going to talk about some of the things anyway. Starting off with things that are not actually going to be part of the expansion itself, but rather will come free with the patch, as Paradox usually do, usually with things that sort of change the entire game, and they can't really keep two versions of it going, especially if it impacts the AI a lot. So the very first thing to talk about is the concept of power projection. Now, in an abstract form, this has always been in the game or, in real-world politics or anything like that. The idea that some countries can more effectively project power on other countries or other areas than others. A good example of that might be something like England, right? England is obviously a relatively strong power in EU4, but if at any point they lose their navy, their ability to project their power anywhere in the world basically goes to zero, unless Scotland is still around and, they want to go and invade the Highlands or something like that. There's really not anything else England can do without that ability. Sometimes that can be a diplomatic thing, right? If you have or don't have a certain powerful ally, your ability to really influence the world in your region might be crippled, that sort of thing. But now it's going to be codified in an actual game system, and it's also very much tied into the new what's the word I'm looking for? Rival system, that's the word. So, for example, if I go into France right now, I'm in observer mode, of course. If I go into France, I can choose to assign myself some rivals, or I could if I wasn't just an observer. And I could say, like, logically, you might do something like England, Castile, and, I don't know, Austria or something like that. You could assign 3 rivals. Well, in the current state of EU4, you can assign any nation you know about in the game as a rival. And that led to a certain amount of kind of gamey behavior a lot, because you could tweak, who you declared to be your rival for various diplomatic gain, or, certain embargoes and things like that. And sometimes it made sense, and sometimes it really didn't. Like, if I am playing as, I'm trying to think of a good example. If I'm playing as Brittany, and I want to suck up to France, who has rivaled the Ottomans, I can declare the Ottomans my rivals as well. But the Ottomans won't even know who the hell Brittany is. They're like, Brittany? I think I've heard of this. Isn't this some little spit of land somewhere in the world? How do they claim to be my rival? This is crap, It's not really legitimate for Brittany to claim that they are a rival of the Ottomans or some silly thing like that. So, under the new system, instead of being able to take any nation in the world as a rival, you will be limited to a subset of nations that make sense. They will be relatively similar in size and also relatively close in some way. We're talking about neighbors, we're talking about people who share certain trade nodes, maybe colonial people. I do apologize, I have a mod loaded that tweaks the look of the game, so any confusion, sorry about that. You're going to have to pick people who sort of kind of make sense that way. And the reason it's much more important that these rivals are appropriate is because your power projection stat, which will appear right around here, you will gain or lose power projection based on how well you are performing compared to your rival. So you're actually going to want to pick rivals that you will be able to outplay or hurt in some way. So one of the easiest ways to gain these power points would be to, and these are different from, of course, from the admin, diplomatic, and military power. This is more akin to sort of I'd say like a prestige or a stability kind of meter, right? It can go positive or negative. I don't know what the limits are, but something like plus 100 to minus 100 seems reasonable. You start to get benefit from it as soon as you go positive at all. Even at a plus 5, you get a bit of a perk to it, and it just continues to scale up beyond there. Of course, they're still developing the system, so the numbers could change dramatically by the time release comes up. So, if you, for example, embargo a rival, that in the build I played was worth 5 power points, and gave you a boost to your morale, both at sea and on land, your trading power, and all kinds of nice little features. Of course, those the actual effects are very likely to change before release as they work out the balance. But it dramatically improves your nation in a lot of different ways to have a positive power projection. Taking land from a rival is another good way to increase your numbers. Winning little battles and skirmishes and wars and all kinds of stuff like that. They're both, so the point of it is there's both militaristic and also economic and diplomatic ways for you to start to sort of I don't know, yeah, project this power on your rivals. And as if you grow, or your rivals grow or shrink, for example, you may lose the ability to claim that such and such a person is a rival. So, like, you know, at the start of the game, France and Burgundy, for example, are probably very suitable rivals. But if France is able to blob up, and Burgundy doesn't, let's assume it doesn't actually collapse or disappear, but, you know, loses out and to the point where it's only got a couple more provinces, then France is probably no longer going to be able to claim that Burgundy is a rival, because they're microscopic at that point. And they're going to have to change to, you know, go back to England or Castile. I bet you Portugal and Aragon would be likely candidates. They don't have to be, like, literally the same size as you. But, you know, within a sort of reasonable span there. So that is going to affect the core gameplay. That is going to be included in the patch automatically. It is not part of the expansion per se, although part of the same release. The other thing that's going to be part of the patch itself, you know, under religion right now, the Catholics have a fair amount of stuff they can do, in that they can participate in the battle for the Curia over here, right? They can try to influence cardinals, gain influence over there, and becoming the Curia controller has significant bonuses, cheaper stability, mostly, oh, the +1 diplomats I love so much. The free leader's pretty good too, and little things like that, but I really, the +1 diplomats is so amazing. And of course the ability to call for crusades and excommunicate people. So there's a game there for Catholics, right? And the problem is the other Christian religions, Protestant and Reformed, don't have quite as much. The Orthodoxy does have, hang on, where can I find, Constantinople? Because the Orthodoxy has the patriarch authority that you can sort of mess around with a little bit, but the Protestants and Reformed didn't have a whole lot of that going on. So the Reformed system, in any case, is getting a pretty significant sort of a do-over, not a do-over, but, you know, some new gameplay features, in that on this page here, they will accrue something called religious fervor over time. I believe the numbers that are being quoted right now are you get 2 per month while at peace and 1 per month while at war, and there may be ways to sort of modify that based on, you know, stability or innovation ideas and so on. And that will just accrue. It will save up. And then at any point, if you want, you're going to have 3 buttons where you can click the buttons to activate certain bonuses, to trade, to military, and to, I believe, like administrative kind of stuff, like teching up. I don't remember just off the top, and of course these things are likely to change. And so you can turn them on and start to spend your religious fervor. You can enable all 3 at once, you can enable just one, you can have them all toggle off, and those will be fine. And so you'll get a pretty significant boost. So whether you're going to want to try to maintain one thing all the time, or if you're going to want to mostly just save up and then hit all 3 of them in a big burst, you know, in the middle of a crisis, in the middle of a war, for example, there may be that. You may just want to save up so that you've got the military points to spend during a war. Anyway, that gives a little bit more sort of gameplay interestingness to the Reformed religion. And then related sort of in a kind of way to that is the new missions and decision system. So the ideas are basically the same. I believe there's going to be a bit of a switch in that, oh, what's going to be changed? I think expansion is going to move to administrative ideas, therefore making the load on diplomatic ideas a little bit more reasonable between exploration and expansion. They're going to be a little bit more, because right now if you want to do any sort of colonial stuff, you're basically sinking all your diplomatic points into diplomatic ideas, and that lets you balance the load, and I think that's quite nice. I also think that expansion ideas kind of fits into the theme of administrative ideas. And then on the flip side, one of these that I can't recall, I believe espionage is going to move over to diplomatic, but don't quote me on that, I might be wrong. It's a minor change, and that's why I wasn't really paying attention to it to the max. But over here, big change with the national decision system. So the mission system is basically going to be the same. The national decisions, though, these lists are going to be considerably shorter come Wealth of Nations, in that these decisions are going to represent more like true and real decisions, like forming nations, for example, right? Those sorts of decisions. Whereas a lot of these that are just sort of like slight tweaks to, you know, national income or this or that are going to be moved out of this list and instead are going to become part of this policy system, which is going to fit right between the missions and the decisions. And there's going to be a button to click Add Policies, and then you're going to be presented with a list of policies you can enact. Now, they unlock by completing ideas. Every policy will require that you've completed 2 idea tracks completely. And the developer told me that for every pair of ideas, there will be a corresponding policy unlocked. So if you've unlocked, say, diplomatic ideas, offensive ideas, quality ideas, and economic ideas, that's 4 different complete ideas, and that should lead to diplomatic plot. Now, not every pairing is necessarily going to be there, but theoretically, the diplomatic ideas might pair with economic and defensive and quality, or whatever I said, which would mean 6 policies available just from unlocking that. And then, you know, defensive plus quality and defensive plus economic might all unlock a variety of policies. Also, if you have one idea unlocked, then you go into the policy screen. It will show you in sort of a grayed out form all of the policies that are dependent on that one idea that you have unlocked, and it'll say, so if I have diplomatic and I don't have innovative, it'll show me a policy though in a grayed out form that, like, okay, you have diplomatic, if you also get innovative, then you can unlock this policy or enable this policy. And the policies are kind of cool. They are divided into 3 categories of administrative, diplomatic, and military, and to enact them, you can enact them, and in the build that I looked at, enacting them was effectively free, but they cost a point, like 1 power point per month, based on what the idea was. So, you know, the administrative, diplomatic, military, or so on and so forth. Again, that cost is obviously very subject to change, but yeah, it'll cost a certain amount of power points per month to keep this policy enacted. And the policies have to be enacted for a certain number of months at a minimum. I was originally quoted 16 months, but then in the build, the tooltip said something like 9, so, you know, somewhere in there, maybe around a year. If you enact a policy, you got to keep it around for at least a year, after which you can cancel it whenever you want, and it'll be stuff like plus 10% more national tax rate, for example, in exchange for spending that 1 PowerPoint per month there. So it allows you to really tune your nation based on the sort of thing you're looking to do. Even more so than ideas, like you can become even more hyper-focused. And I think that a few of these things are really going to tie into the ability to perhaps play a smaller nation in a more competitive form, because you can sort of min-max your experience. Like, it might become more viable to stay as a small Venice, and just, you know, small trade-oriented Venice, as an example, by really focusing that. Obviously, you're still going to have to manage your diplomacy so that, you know, Austria doesn't come and squash you, but assuming you can stay friends with Austria, then that sort of thing becomes pretty damn viable. Now, the other thing that will help, and of course this is one of the big features touted for Wealth of Nations, will be the expanded trade system, including the new trade companies that you can set up. So, if we pop over to our map modes over here, and we note the Colonial Regions, right? If we go to the Colonial Regions map mode, then we can see that there are colonial regions set up in the New World. And this is part of the Conquest of Paradise expansion. They added these colonial regions that if you colonize, if you have like 5 colonies in one of these groups, I think it's 5, I don't think it's 4, I think it's 5 colonies in any one area, then they will form a colonial government, right? You'll get your sort of, not the United States, because obviously that's after they become independent, but that sort of thing, right? Colonial New England, colonial sort of English colonial Canada, and so on and so forth, and they will have their own government forms, and they'll just be one of your, sort of like a vassal, but they don't take up a diplomatic slot. So that was added here. But you'll notice these colonial regions only exist in the Americas, right? You can't, while you can colonize, say, Australia, they're not a colonial region, so they'll never form a colonial government. Instead, everything in the east sort of bit over here, actually, I think including Africa. In the build I saw, Africa was one big trade region, but I think that's going to change. Anyway, so just like there are colonial regions, there are going to be trade company regions over here. And what you can do, once you possess a province, they will be button. And I assume this is only for Western nations. Actually, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure it's only for Western nations. If you were to own, say, a province over here in India, then you will have a button that will give you the ability to form or to sort of give this province to your trade company, right? Like your East India Trade Company, for example. Now, you will still own the province. You will still control the province. But by toggling that button on, it will dramatically cut down the tax revenue from this province. You will, I think you'll lose 50% of your tax and something like 100% of your manpower. So switching to doing trade companies means you're not going to be quite as militaristic as before. Now, of course, a lot of this overseas stuff over here was not really contributing a lot to your manpower anyway, so it's not necessarily the end of the world. And how much are you getting out of taxes? Well, that's another big question mark. But what do you get out of it? What you get out of it is a massive, massive increase to your trade power in this area. Furthermore, if you own 50%, well, sorry, that number is also subject to change. Right now they're toying with 50%, they might go to 40% or whatever. If you own more than a certain percentage of provinces in a trade zone, again, this is not going to be the same as the trade map mode zones. Well, they may or may not map to the same, but these trade company zones, which is going to be a new map mode, if you own more than X% of the provinces in that zone, then you will actually get an extra merchant, which is obviously incredibly powerful, right? By default, you have 2 merchants. Yeah, you can unlock, you know, an extra, couple from, so you can get 1 extra one from expansion ideas, and you can get 2 more from trade ideas. So is that it? 3 merchants in total? So that can bring you up to 5 merchants, which is quite a bit, don't get me wrong. But if you really want to collect or control the trade everywhere in the world, you're going to need a lot more merchants to like really influence things, and that's if you took all those ideas. So by controlling a certain amount of a trade company zone, you will get an extra merchant, and that is so incredibly strong. It also gives really good incentive for different nations, different sort of Eastern colonial nations for fighting over different areas so that you can get control of those merchants. So what they're toying with is the percentages in terms of making it easy or hard for more than one nation to have a free merchant from that, right? If they set it to 50%, it'll be basically impossible for 2 nations to both get a free merchant out of their trade companies. But if they set it to 40% or even 30%, then it's possible for more than one to get one. So they're still working on that balance. It'll be interesting to see exactly what they choose to do there. Yeah, you can toggle the trade company on and off basically at will. And it doesn't seem like there's any way to really exploit that, because what it's affecting is like your month-to-month buildup. Like, you know, your manpower, your tax rate, so on and so forth. I think the only sort of instantaneous benefit you could get from maybe toggling off being a trade company would be if all of a sudden a lot of your trade was being sort of blockaded and hit by pirates, right? Privateers, and your trade is all of a sudden not really effective anymore. Then you might want to go and toggle off the trade companies just so you can get some tax revenue or something of that nature. But other than that, I don't think the toggleable nature of it is particularly exploitable. So that's going to be fine. So talking about privateers. So one of the things you can do right now, obviously, is if you got light trade ships. Let's see if I can pull up an example here. Right, so this fleet has some light ships in it, and I can tell them to protect trade in a trade zone. What they will do is they will patrol a trade zone and give me more trade power in that node. So if we go to Venice over here, of course we're not because the game is paused and I'm an observer, there's no ships there. But if I had the ships protecting the Venice trade node, they would be adding trade power here, which would be added to the power for my provinces, and would come out to a certain net amount of actual trade power, and that would let me collect trade or forward trade more effectively. Now, the new feature, there will be a new button on that page which will allow you, instead of going and protecting trade to sort of increase your power, you can go and tell your ships to sort of harass trade, to become privateers, basically act as pirates and hurt other people's trade instead. And the amount that you can hurt trade with these ships is much higher than the amount that you can help your own trade with your own ships, right? So The idea being, if you don't have enough of a presence somewhere, enough of the ability to influence the trade to really make money on your own with this fleet, so there's not much sense in sending them somewhere to protect trade. Instead, you can go and just try to hurt the trade and hurt other nations instead. So it will dramatically decrease their trade power and their ability to make money that way. I can definitely see a situation where if you're fighting over control of some node that has a couple of different outputs, right? Like here from the Bay of Alexandria, it may be more or less useful that instead of protecting the trade here and increasing your pull, you might just want to go and harass the trade of the other ships to decrease their power here, which will effectively increase your power, right? In sort of another way of doing it. Maybe you can have two fleets working in concert. I don't know, because the balance is not done yet, and because we haven't actually had a chance to really, play with it, we don't know exactly where the numbers are, but it's intended to give you a tool to fight sort of people's trade power, even if you don't really have a lot of trade influence. And certainly you can, use it to go places where you don't personally care about the trade, but you still want to hurt someone in general. So you can send those fleets. Now, those fleets will sort of fly a pirate flag, but everyone will know who actually owns the fleet anyway, and you can't sink the fleet directly, but it will give you a CB against the people. If someone's coming and sending privateers to your stuff and disrupting your trade, if you have, and it's based on how much trade influence you have in a zone, right? So if I'm here, if I'm the Mamluks, and this trade node in Alexandria is obviously, relatively important for me, and someone is sending privateers here, then I will get a CB against them. Whereas if you've got someone, apparently, who doesn't have a whole lot of influence, like Tuscany down here is basically not relevant to this trade node, they may not get a CB against someone who's sending privateers. It remains to be seen exactly how that will work out. So yeah, we can get a trade dispute sort of CB that way. Very similar to if someone is embargoing you, for example. So you want to be careful about who you send your ships, or where you send your ships to. The other thing you'll be able to do is you'll be able to fabricate a trade claim. Again, this page looks a little different because I'm running a mod. So where you can do a covert action of fabricating a claim on a province, you will be able to justify a trade war in a very similar way against another nation. So it's just another way of generating a casus belli, right? And the actual mechanics of the war, I don't think Venice has a CB. Oh, it does. Albania and Corfu. So if we go down to Corfu, which is not here. Come on, find me Corfu. Why am I so... There, Corfu. If I go to Corfu and I try to declare war over here, obviously I have to declare my reason for the war. And you can say this reconquest gives me a discount to aggressive expansion, and also... Yeah, discounted aggressive expansion and discount to the diplomatic cost of full annexation or conquest of Corfu. And so that trade dispute will affect what I can get. Probably a discount to asking for trade power or something like that. Also affects how you can generate ticking war scores. So didn't go into that, and those things are subject to change, but it does give you an extra way to generate a CB, which is always fun to do. Anyway, I think I've covered the major points. Let me just do a quick little run through of my tabs here to see if I can remember anything. Oh, one of the other quality of life improvements is if you are Catholic and you want to fight in the papacy, there will be a checkbox or some UI element that you can click next to a cardinal, which will make sure that you will automatically spend points whenever you lose control over a cardinal, right? Instead of having to go back and being like, oh, got to put another 5 points in to make sure I keep control over so-and-so because Mainz keeps trying to kick me out or something like that. Well, you can just put a checkbox and the game will automatically spend points when needed to keep you in the #1 position, which is a huge quality of life improvement I like very much. Now, the word, like the text that I've seen, says that this is something you get in Wealth of Nations. It seems a little odd to me. To me, that's something that should just be included in the patch as a base game element, but no, we'll see how it goes. Other than that, there's plenty of rebalance in general in the game. One of the things they've looked at, rebalancing some of the pips on these units, right? By pips, we mean these little dots. So they're looking at rebalancing some of these things with the later game units because there was some, maybe weirdness in terms of how it progressed. Also between the different tech groups, Western, Eastern, Muslim, so on and so forth, to maybe rebalance things. I think generally increasing the strength of maybe some of the other tech groups compared to Western. But, we'll see how that exactly shakes out. I've probably forgotten something else, but I've forgotten what it could be, obviously. I don't think anything's changed there. I don't think much has changed over here in the new world. The randomized new world script isn't really being looked at either, which is unfortunate because I do think that it's maybe a little bit on the weak, uninteresting side. Although, I guess it does the job, right? It is a genuine randomized new world. It just so happens that our actual world is very interesting to play in, and obviously, you know, certain game elements have been balanced given the distance and adjacency of so many of these provinces, so the game is really optimized to be played in something like that. But there you have it. So this is based on the preview of the game that I saw at PAX East. I'm really looking forward to it because, of course, I really trade-based stuff is really my preferred thing to do in these games anyway, right? Like with Crusader Kings 2, one of the things I really enjoyed the most, my favorite expansion, was the ones that dealt with the trade republics. So that's going to be really good. I think some of the government types may have been fiddled with just ever so slightly here in terms of the bonuses. One of the other bonuses, for example, is if you are reformed, you will no longer get the plus 10% trade boost anymore. Instead, you'll get, I think, increased tolerance of heretics, which is kind of a nerf, in that plus 10% trade efficiency was really amazing, but because of the new Fervor buttons, they're effectively going to be replacing that, plus giving you more options. So anyway, looking forward to it very much. You can expect more videos on Wealth of Nations as the press previews are released. See you next time, folks. Bye-bye. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. Also, leave a comment. Did you know I read every single comment someone leaves on my video? That's insane. Why would I do that? I don't know, but I'll read yours.